nonpartisan, nonprofit public opinion research and public engagement organization. Our work involves understanding where different citizens, stakeholders, publics are coming from on complex, divisive issues, understanding their starting point views, using research to determine that, using research to figure out some of the best ways to frame issues and engage them on solutions. And that research phase of our work then becomes a platform for various strategies of dialogue, deliberation, engagement to get people involved in problem solving. We do community conversations. Those are big, broad-based public events. We do a lot of very focused, small-scale problem-solving dialogues and deliberations among particular stakeholders or getting leaders and citizens and experts from different sides of an issue together. We also work within a lot of organizations, a lot of public institutions. We work within a lot of schools, a lot of community colleges, for example, trying to transform those institutions so they better serve, in this case, the students that are trying to find a foothold in society. We're related to the National Issue Forums. Our organization was founded by Cyrus Vance and Dan Yankelovich. And Dan Yankelovich was a public intellectual and a survey research pioneer, was very influential when the Kettering Foundation created the National Issue Forums. He and David Matthews, who's the president of the Kettering Foundation, had some deep dialogue and deliberation themselves with a small group of people, and sort of out of that came the National Issue Forums. And a lot of it was strongly influenced, certainly by David's thinking, but also by Dan's. One of Dan's big themes has been, how do citizens come to judgment? So one of his great, one of his classic books in the field is Coming to Public Judgment. And he posits, after decades and decades and decades of studying public opinion and how it evolves on issues, that citizens go through certain stages as they grapple with complex issues. And if you understand that and understand where they are in that process, it can make you a lot smarter, both about how you research them and also how you engage them and help them along their learning curve. And one of the secrets of helping citizens move along that learning curve is to help them grapple effectively with choices and trade-offs involved in addressing a difficult public problem. So the whole notion of sort of choice work and laying out for citizens a number of different alternative, 3 or 4 different ways in which their community or the nation could go in addressing an issue, and talking in a nonpartisan way about the pros and cons and trade-offs involved of these different paths has been one of Dan's contributions, and that's sort of at the heart and center of the National Issue Forums, is framing those issues in ways that lay out those choices. So for many, many years, Public Agenda created the National Issue Forums issue books and the issue guides that frame those issues and lay out those choices, and then are used in these convenings around the country. And at some point, the Kettering Foundation kind of internalized that, but we've been close cousins, highly related to Kettering and the National Issue Forum for more than several decades. I think the notion of building civic infrastructure that supports dialogue and deliberation in a more sort of participatory form of politics is an attempt by people to figure out, how do we scale this kind of work up? And scaling dialogue and deliberation work is one of the big challenges, right? I think that as a field, we know quite a bit how to do it in a neighborhood or a community basis. There are success stories in states, but that's harder. And the idea of sort of a national capacity for engaging citizens on particular public problems is very challenging, and I don't think we've cracked the code on that yet. And I think people who are talking about creating a civic infrastructure are trying to find a language and trying to find a vision for doing that. I agree that another way to look at the idea of building civic infrastructure is to think about lots and lots and lots of local activity that can naturally and organically link up as the need arises. And I actually think that's the more likely mode in which this kind of work will grow. I actually didn't mean to imply before that it had to be some kind of tightly organized from the top, super event or something like that. And I think that the more that this kind of work grows and takes hold and has impacts on the local level, and then the slightly larger than just the community level, the greater chance there is going to be of these things kind of affecting the culture and different practitioners in different settings being able to actually kind of link up. Well, I think there are accessible materials that can help people who have a beginning interest in this kind of work or in this kind of experience. There are a number of fairly, basic, simple kinds of methods that it's certainly conceivable that you could create toolkits and, that would allow people to begin to self-organize around it. But I think you should think bigger about about the potential of creating more demand. It's not just that then people could form their own groups, which I think is a good thing, but what would it mean for local politics if there was a greater demand for this kind of participation, this kind of responsible, deliberative participation, not just sounding off, but actually thinking about issues and talking them through, and then, and then just sort of deciding where you stand and making your voice heard on that end of the process. There are lots and lots of other implications. So then the question might be, well, how do you help mayors get better, for example, at doing this kind of at engagement work, right? And that's perhaps where some of the tools should be targeted. Right now we're doing a research project with public officials in California on their attitudes towards local public engagement, to really understand to what extent people are doing those practices as they go about making decisions or setting policies. To the extent they are, what kinds of strategies are they using, what are they finding difficult, what kinds of training or capacity or tools would be useful to them, etc. And if you think about getting that kind of insight on the one hand and then stimulating demand on the other, you can start to see a happy marriage, right? So there's lots of, I think, good things that could come out of stimulating demand. Whether it's a public official or a citizen, you got to understand that they have a point. They're not crazy for feeling that way. As kind of meet them sort of where they are, because there's a lot of validity there. I mean, I think the citizen who's a little skeptical about whether my voice is going to have an impact given the money in politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're not crazy, right? And a public official who says it is a drag to have a public hearing, and I've had nothing but really ugly experiences, well, that is their experience. So it's really going to be a matter, I think, of public officials educating public officials more than any of us trying to do it, although we can certainly help. As in a lot of change, there are sort of early adopters and pioneers, and I think a smart strategy is to empower them and support them. There needs to be models of their having success. Public officials are in a tricky place in relationship to public engagement. I've worked with a lot of them because in order to be able to really do this work properly, they have to give up a little bit of control and kind of be open to, things happening that they didn't necessarily plan. That's a weird, scary place for a public official to put him or herself, and you kind of have to understand that. It's probably best for them to start with an issue that's an important issue, but one that they haven't staked their career on, for example, right? There's just certain sort of strategic kinds of considerations as you try to engage them. And issues in which, they don't necessarily want to stick out their neck, but they know that it needs to be done, and they want to get, so I think one of the interesting trends might be participatory budgeting, for example, which is a very pragmatic, deliberative process. Given the tight resources that are a fact of life nowadays, really tough decisions need to be made about budgeting, and what public official wants to cut this or that program on their own, right? That should be a collective decision, and it's better for the official and it's better for the community for that to be done in an inclusive and deliberative way, rather than in sort of a backroom politics kind of a way. So I mean, there are situations that I think that are going to be more conducive to public officials kind of taking a chance, and I think you need to look for those. I don't have thoughts on what shape it'll be in, but I have hopes. I think there are some trends that, could converge and that we could try to work to help them converge that could lead to a much better politics. Part of that is the dialogue, deliberation, engagement, field and movement. And to the extent that it continues to develop and cohere and become stronger and better at what it does, that can contribute, right? The other piece of it kind of has to do with your interest in demand. Right now I think there's a very strong frustration with the status quo, with business as usual. And that could go in lots of different directions, right? So if that were to go in the direction of, a demand for a better, more honest, more thoughtful, more inclusive, more deliberative kinds of politics, those trends could kind of reverberate off each other and create some momentum towards a positive, what I would think of as positive change. There are other things that are contributing to that too. So I'm hopeful that those things will begin to converge, and I'm hopeful that we can figure out ways to help that to happen, and that could be good.